All right, Christopher here. Welcome to Do Explain. Before we begin, I'd like to thank my current supporters who inspire me to carry on with this project and make it financially viable as well. I'm very grateful to all of you. Big hugs. And while I'm not in the business of telling people what to do, I can share my vision for Do Explain going forward. I like to work on the podcast full time instead of just a few days a month. I want to build a real platform for the fun and friendly exchange of interesting ideas, and I want to do it ad-free if possible, because I don't want any ideas to be off limits for us to explore, and I also want to keep saying dumb shit without repercussions. But to do this, I'll need a steady income, and that's why I need your help. So if you enjoy what I'm doing here, and you want to join me in my vision and become a part of growing this project, consider going over to patreon.com/doexplain and sign up to become a monthly supporter. All right, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoy this episode. All right, so I'm here today with mighty whore lord Aella. Aella, welcome to Do Explain.
I don't think I've ever heard someone say that out loud before.
No, that's great. How did it sound? Did it sound as good as it looked in writing?
It was nice, yeah. Made me feel mighty.
That's great. I mean, I kind of pride myself on my own Twitter tagline. I think it sums me up pretty good. An irrevocably curious dickhead.
I like the balance of that, because it sounds kind of like innocent and not at the same time.
Right. For people who don't know much about you, how would you describe yourself these days? What do you want people to know about you going into the discussion?
That's such like a weird question. It's like, okay, what are like the blurb? What are like, and then like the way that I figure out what to say, it's something like, okay, what are the parts of me that are most different from the average? And then you try and check. And so like the answer is really dependent on your conception of other people. I'm like, okay, what are other people like, so that I know what to say to communicate how I am not like that. But I do sex work, was raised very religious. I like data a lot, and I got funded to do sex research or sexual fetish research. So I've been working on that recently. Did a lot of LSD at one point. I don't shower very much. Yeah, those are maybe some highlighters, some pointers.
I don't know why the last one made me the most excited. I think I'm a kindred spirit there. Yeah, okay, so I am really excited to talk to you, Aella. I have had it on my mind for quite some time. I think I came across your blog several years ago, and I read the articles you wrote on your acid, your usage of a mountain of acid, and it was very interesting to me. And I think I've figured out that usually when I really want to talk to someone, they have a combination of being really interested in ideas and having good faith discussions and debates about different interesting things. And yeah, the rationality and reason in general, plus the other end of being a consciousness explorer. I just find that combination of loving rationality and stringent argument, but also being really into just letting go of the conceptual world and just exploring one's inner landscapes, I guess. I find that to be a very interesting combination.
Mm-hmm.
So I am going to want to start with, for those who don't know, you had spent a good 10 months doing more acid than most people probably ever do in their lifetime. And
yeah,
I guess I'm curious about a lot of things there, but maybe we could start with just outlining what motivated you to start that journey in the first place, where you were in your mind at that point, and then maybe walk us down month by month what took place there as you did it more and more.
So it started, I was pretty young, and I had been raised very religious, like not much drug exposure at all. I'd tried weed a few times, which didn't really work. So I'd never been high before, and I was at some party, and finally I was like, you know what? I am like out in the world. I'm growing up like just like fuck it, like let's just try something.
Right.
And I took some acid, which was I regretted at that time because it was really hard for me
Mm.
because I had such a desire to control my mind. I was like terrified of going insane. I was terrified of thinking wrong thoughts. And then once my brain started like wigging out, I was like, okay, I'm gonna be, in control of this experience and observe it from like a high and mighty perspective.
Right.
Uh, which, as you've done LC, this is like not something that works. Because I kept realizing that the part of me that was like high and mighty and observing was in itself affected by LSD too. And then I would like keep scrambling for higher ground and realizing that the LSD was following me. It was really an awful experience. But after that, I kind of, like, after I came down, there was some sort of invisible processing that happened where some part of me, I think, realized that I had been doing something wrong, that like that scrambling was like not the way to engage with acid. I think this was pretty subconscious. And eventually I was like, I want to try that again. I feel like I could do that differently. And then I tried it again and I did not fight, and it was really, really good. It was like, oh shit, there's a lot here that I had no idea about, the classic awakening, like the initial stage.
Right.
Or something. And then it was great. And so after that, I was just like, okay, well, let's do it again. And then I did it again. And then after that, I was like, that was great. Let's just do it again. And then I just kept doing it. I didn't realize that it was so abnormal. I just figured, like, well, I seem to be getting a lot out of it. It's this really fascinating experience. I am like learning so much about myself and my mind. So why not just keep going? So were you going to say something, or should I continue?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just curious. The first experience you did you say that was with other people, or did you do it by yourself?
Yeah, it was other people. It was a terrible environment. It was like a frat party.
Oh no!
It was like heavy club music and a bunch of drunk people. Not great.
Nice. Yeah, that's like the perfect setting from a therapeutic framework, right? Yeah.
Yeah. It was not intentional use at all.
Right. No, I mean, I think that's probably my nightmare, actually, to do it in a setting like that. So that's very interesting starting point. I love that what you took away from that was, let's try that again. But so do you remember, do you have any clue what kind of dose we're talking about?
I don't know. They didn't tell me when I took it. In hindsight, my guess is it was about 150.
Okay, so still pretty decent amount.
Yeah, it was enough that I was having like pretty serious visuals.
Okay. And when you say you were trying to, it sounded kind of like, would you say you were close to kind of a ego dissolution type experience, but you were resisting it? It sounded like something.
The first time, oh yeah, no. I mean, like acid like kind of tries to tear you apart.
Yeah.
And so like in that way, I guess kind of I was close, but no, I did not experience ego death.
Okay.
I experienced like terrified ego holding on.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay. And so then you kept doing it, but so in terms of the practicalities of that, did you keep doing it with other people, or did you start doing it by yourself, or how did that look like?
Yeah, it mostly started kind of with other people. I started doing it like with like one other friend in my house where a party was not going for a while, and that was really nice. And then I lived with a group of people who were all doing acid a lot, and so I just kind of did it with them for a while. But then eventually, over time, I transitioned a little bit more towards doing it alone.
Right. And did you usually do it with music or blindfold or anything like it looks now in the studies, or did you just wing it basically?
Kind of wing it. I tried different things. Okay. Like music was common because music sounds great on acid. I mean, my highest trip though, I tried no music and just to lie there with my eyes closed in bed, which was 600 micrograms. So I did like do like some experiments here and there, but mostly just like hanging out in my bed and then playing music.
Wow. I mean, that's, doing 600 micrograms by yourself without any structure at all in terms of music. That sounds kind of scary. Do you remember that particular experience?
Well, the scary part was when I managed to try to put on music. Like I had it set up so that I could play it if I wanted to. Yeah, it was very intense. But like at that point, I've been doing like a lot of acid, and so it wasn't like I mean, it was insane. Don't get me wrong. Like
Yeah.
I'm sure if you've done any high dose, like you know that you can't
Yeah.
not make that insane.
No.
Um, but it was fine. I remember hearing that like there was a fan on, and I remember feeling like I could hear every single rotation of the fan because like time was just like not moving
Wow.
anymore. And and then at some point tried to put on music, and
Mhm.
it was a song that I'd heard a lot. But the time dilation was so severe that it didn't sound like music to me anymore. It sounded like
Mm.
just like a note, and then I would forgot what the last note was, and then there was another note,
Right.
and so it didn't. I was like, I knew vaguely that these were notes that I'd heard before, like it was striking some familiarity, but like it wasn't in any sense like the same kind of thing that I would call music anymore.
Yeah.
And that kind of like disturbed me at the time.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
was like, ah, shit, did I break my ability to enjoy things? Which was really scary, but it was okay.
Right, right. I mean, that's so many functions that we take for granted just in normal perception
Mm.
are so heavily constructed, and we rely on them so much and take them for granted that that can be a very disorienting experience when something is trivial seeming as just remembering the notes that came before doesn't work that way anymore. So you did this for 10 months or something like that. What would you say? You said you were learning a lot and you were really enjoying it. So can you give us a little more detail what you mean by that? What were you learning, and what was the thing that kept you coming back and keeping you intrigued, and what made you stop 10 months in?
Yeah, the thing I learned was mostly like realizing what parts of me were me, because there's a way where your identity is sort of invisible if you've never really like seen a contrast to it before. And
Mhm.
this is something I've written about, but like the analogy I like is a tree. Like my identity felt like kind of a tree, and every time I did acid, it would like burn away a little bit of the branches. And it didn't mean that the branches weren't there so much as like I I became no longer subject to them. Like
Mm.
like they became like separate from me, held in front of me. And every time I did acid, it was like a little bit more like going down the trunks of the tree, the branches, and like realizing how much more there was still to burn. Because I had no idea that I was so vast, that like my mind
Right.
like has so many assumptions. And like
Yeah.
when I say the word assumptions, people sort of like assume this high level thing, like a belief, like, oh, I assume that the economy works this way. But I don't even
Mhm.
mean that. I mean just like really small scale assumptions, uh like if I eat I will feel better, like little tiny things that make up the tiny granule sand of our minds.
Right.
And so there's a lot of like erasing that, which was great. It was also excruciatingly painful. uh
Yeah. Yeah, I was
it
gonna say.
was My trips were full of just like sobbing and agony for a long time, which I consider to be very valuable.
Mhm.
And it just I just kept going, just wanted to see how far down the tree I could burn. And eventually I got to the point where I was pretty non-functional. Like I stopped working. I mostly stopped doing much. Like from the outside, I think it looked like depression, although I was having a great
Mm.
time. Like it was very much like I was just so at peace and like my attitude towards a pain was to examine the thing as opposed to act on it.
Fundamental curiosity rather than maybe running away from the pain.
Something like that. Yeah, like I wanted to know what it was like to hurt as badly as I could. And
Mm.
there was a way this extended, like even when I wasn't tripping, like I became very altered. Like by the end
Right.
of the tripping was not that different from not tripping. It was like a little louder, but my experience off of acid was extremely altered. I felt like I was in a dream
Yeah.
all the time. I was really, really at peace. It was great. I remember thinking of acid like a lover. And but
Mm.
of course the non-functional thing, like my
Yeah.
roommates got mad at me because like I just stopped doing anything.
Yeah. Right.
And eventually I was like, if I keep going down this path, like I'm going to become homeless, because I'm just not, I'm not being able to make money at all. I'm not doing anything. Like, I'm just going to be doing this, but on the street. And I was like, chill with that. I was like, okay, I'm ready. I'm ready. And then I was like, okay, if you keep doing that, like, eventually you're just going to stop eating food because, like, you're at peace with hunger. You know, hunger is no longer a thing that really motivates you. And I was like, okay, am I ready to die? You know, I guess the end of this is death. And that was when I decided to stop doing acid. Not because I mind dying. Like, dying seems cool, but there was something like
Okay.
like if I die, then I
Nice.
can't keep experiencing or something. And I
Yeah.
realized that I had, like, part of the nature of experiencing was to desire experience in some way. And I was like, oh,
Ah.
okay, dying is not the thing that I want, so I'm just gonna not do that. And then I stopped doing acid.
And how long ago was this?
8 years.
8 years ago.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Yeah. Wow. So many things I want to comment on there. But I'm fascinated by, and I've heard you say that. I think there's a documentary where you take acid live, and we get to follow you doing that, which I thought was really, really nice and beautiful. But I think you said something in there akin to that where you said something like, yeah, I'm so grateful I get to suffer. I can suffer this much or something. I can feel pain this much or something. And that's really, I get goosebumps now saying that, because I remember seeing that and actually having something click into place for me.
Really?
Yeah, I've had and still have a lot of chronic pain. I have fibromyalgia, or chronic pain syndrome or whatever. And there's a very fine line between suffering and pain, but there's a very big difference between the way I view pain, and it sounds like you might be similar there, is just, it's just uncomfortable, but suffering is the aversion. They're trying to push the pain away rather than just the uncomfort itself. And so that's very interesting. I like that. Okay, so to give you some background context, because I assume that you know very little about me or my podcast.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And so I don't see if you can see my screen name there, but I called myself Chris Crybaby today.
Yeah.
I've been ranting a lot in the last episodes about how I'm a huge fan of crying. I think crying is incredibly therapeutic. I come from childhood and a background where I learned very early on that emotion wasn't safe. Expressing certain emotions wasn't safe. And then I don't think I cried until maybe I was 25. I'm 30 now. Something like that, maybe 27. And then now I've been crying for like 2 years. And when I say crying, I don't mean just ruminating or wallowing in self-despair all day, but crying more as some sort of wordless problem solving and some inexplicit. It's just, I usually see it as we all have these. We all have this well of emotion. We have grief and anger, rage and sadness, and even repressed joy. I think positive emotions are often even scarier than negative emotions for people, which sounds counterintuitive. But so yeah, I've been cleaning out my emotional pipes for a long time, and I can't I can't believe how big of a difference that has made for me in my life. And I tear up for everything right now. I'm almost on the verge of crying now because I feel so grateful. But it's so I really resonated with what you said there, crying a lot, and just you described it as the roots on the tree there and being much vaster than we usually assume. I think that that's absolutely the case, that we over identify with the small conscious tip of the iceberg, which is basically just the puppet being puppeteered by all the unconscious material that we, by definition, don't have access to in ordinary life. So yeah, I find it very, very interesting. But so before you started doing any of the acid, were you at all interested in, I'm not a huge fan of the word, but spirituality. I mean, in terms of exploring your mind and thinking about consciousness or meditating or anything of that kind.
No, no, not at all.
No. Okay.
Not even a little bit. Yeah, I had been religious, which is a form of spirituality, and I had like
Right.
in hindsight, I'm realizing that a lot of like the philosophy that I was thinking about really hard was like pointing in that direction, but it wasn't like embodied for me. It was like very intellectual.
I mean, you've spent much more time physically in rationalist communities, as far as I know. I mean, I'm from the age where I've met most of my friends over Twitter um, in the rationalist communities. But so, would you say that's a very prevalent thing? The lack of embodiment and the overemphasis on the heady stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
Right.
Definitely. I actually joined the rationality community like after I did acid the next year. So I didn't actually my severe intellect was just like chronic like rat person,
Yeah.
like, or like autist brain kind of like left brain orientation.
Nice.
But yeah, the rationalists also tend to not be very embodied, which makes me a little sad.
Yes. Yes, and I remember I have this anecdote I tell sometimes, which is I don't know. Do you know of? I assume you know critical rationalism and the David Deutsch people.
Vaguely, I've heard the term, but I haven't really looked into it.
Okay, okay, and you're not familiar with the person David Deutsch, the Oxford physicist.
I've heard people talk about him, but I haven't
Okay,
paid attention really.
right. Okay, but so he is kind of spearheading this part of the community. Reluctantly, I think he doesn't want people to be fervent followers, but very interesting man, very interesting philosophy in general, and but it's very heavily focused on on the importance of ideas in general, which I don't disagree with it, but I remember I started this podcast as an exploration of his ideas in the beginning, and so I was all into that for a year or something like that. And then I actually got to go and meet David Deutsch in Oxford. And I just remember meeting him, and he talks a lot about ideas such as the brain in a vat, which I'm sure you're familiar with.
Yeah.
And I've never, like, he's the nicest man I've ever met, and he's one of the people I respect the most in the world intellectually. But he really embodied the disembodied view of, he felt like a brain in a vat in the most endearing way possible. But it was such a strong experience because I remember seeing that and feeling like, wow, this feels like a brain in a body. Like it felt very distinct in a very interesting way.
That's
And
so
then
interesting.
yeah, that was extremely interesting for me. And then I went to meet a guy who is my not my dear friend, but he was my nutritionist back then. I never met him either. And he's all about the body and the importance of the body and embodiment. And I just, he was just, it was such a difference. It was like meeting Superman just in terms of his presence and just feeling like he was every millimeter of his body. And I'm just fascinated by how much your ideas about these things can manifest in terms of that. And I think many people in the rationalist community might, maybe without realizing it, I don't mean that to be condescending in any way, but I think that the split between reason and emotion, I think, is a false one. In terms of, if you want to think better, I think embodiment is only for the good. At least that's been my experience. So I'm happy that you have that you mentioned embodiment and that you seem to be into that stuff as well. I know you like dancing.
Oh yeah, dancing is
which is awesome.
Absolutely peak.
That's great.
I do think it's like kind of a misconception. I think very good rationalists tend to integrate emotion pretty well, like better even than a lot of hippies I know.
Okay.
But somehow they do it without embodiment. which is a little
Mm.
weird, and I'm like slightly sus about it. It's just a bizarre like other form of being that I don't really understand.
What? That's very interesting. I've never heard it put forth like that. What do you mean by that? Like, how would it look like to have integrated emotion? Can you do that? I guess is my first thought. Is it possible to? What does embodiment mean then? Because to me, it just
Yeah,
means being in line with, um, yeah, the emotional part and the reptilian part, or whatever you want to call it. Like everything, it's basically just information, right? So it's just a more efficient way to integrate all information into account. Um, I guess
yeah. I
is the way
guess
I
I'm
think.
like maybe I'm not using the terms correctly, but there's a way where sometimes very embodied people, it feels like they're using their body to gain and process information. Like
Mm.
you have a feeling and you go assume, a weird shape in the corner. And it's not just that you can do that, but that you're like
Right.
getting info from your body to the degree that you know that that's what you want to do. Like a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people don't even know that like the concept of like doing something strange with your body, like it isn't even really in possibility space. So they don't like process those urges as something to listen to. And I think
Right.
to rationalists, even very good rationalists I know, kind of fail on this regard. I mean, I'm saying fail, like assuming that they have those urges and aren't acting on them. It's
Mm-hmm.
possible they don't have those urges at all, and I'm like typical minding. But they don't seem to be doing that sort of thing. But they do seem to be pretty good at like checking to see if there's tension in their stomach, that sort of thing.
Mm.
Like circling
Yeah.
really hit the
Right.
rationalist community hard a couple years ago, and I think that was pretty good for a lot of people.
I've heard of circling many times, and I feel like I kind of know what it is. And it sounds like something I would love to do. But can you explain
Yeah,
just how it works? Do you want to
yeah.
circle with
When
me
we
right
first
now?
started talking, I thought maybe you already circled, but if you didn't, that you would love it.
Oh, okay, because of the weird eye contact request.
Yeah, they do a lot of that
Yeah.
circling.
Yeah. All right. Cool.
Yeah, circling's great. It's just you sit there and talk about the present moment. I mean, there's like some guidelines. It's like kind of hard. It's like
But that,
pornography, and you see it, but like,
right.
and you can
Right.
like kind of describe the shape of it. Like, well, there's breasts, but there's not always breasts. So
Right.
there's like some common patterns that happen in it that are not necessary. Um, but yeah, it's great. You just sit there and talk about the present moment.
You know, that does sound great, but also I feel like, and this is something I want to, one of the reasons I want to pry a little deeper into your acid experience there and how you view your mind now. But I don't know. I think that's why I like rationalist people too. Like I mentioned in the beginning, people who have both sides, because I'm also very allergic to, like, yeah, when it gets overly hippie or completely devoid of any reason, or any, like, just in general drawing conclusions from experience without having anything else corroborating
Mm.
those type of experiences. I am very allergic to, which is why I love people like
Yeah,
Sam Harris, or which I'm sure you're familiar with.
yeah. And I think you're right. I think that like what they're doing is like sort of like I was talking about burning the tree down, right? And I,
Mm-hmm.
I think that some people are very good at like letting the tree be burnt, but like some people are like, okay, I cannot not have branches there. Like there needs to be something. And so if you like burn
Mm,
away a section, people sort of like, okay, there's been some radical change here. And then they sort of come up with like brand new narratives to cope with this radical change. So they're
right.
like, I think to some degree that I did this, although I think I do it like relatively less than other people. Where it's like, I think collective consciousness is a big one. Like people are like, oh, I notice
Mm-hmm.
that I'm having the experience of my identity, being shifted or being very connected to other people. And they come up
Yes.
with a narrative about like, okay, so this means that we must all have consciousnesses that are like coming from the same source and feeding into each of us in this way. And so there's like some melting of distinction here. They're not,
Mm-hmm.
there's a discomfort with not having a story that needs to be true. I don't mind stories that don't need to be true. Like, oh, it feels like this thing. Like it feels like a collective consciousness. Like that's interesting. That seems fine to me.
Yeah.
But there's a way where it's like, I need to know what's going on in the outside world. And when I feel a change, I'm going to develop a narrative that gives me that sense of control. And I think that's what a lot of the hippie communities do. And I
Yep.
think when people take psychedelics and then have a like come out of it and people are like, wow, that they seem stupider now, like it's probably because they're doing that thing.
Brilliant. I really, yeah, I don't want to give you too much cred because I'm gonna try to find something where I don't agree with you, so we can have a little intellectual wrestling there. But no, yeah, I think that's right, and I think in general, especially when people go from, I feel like there's a natural progression here of sorts, where in terms of experience, like when we speak about these things, I think it's very important to differentiate between, okay, um, we can talk about a matter of experiences, like yeah, everything is one. You can say that without it being embarrassing if you're just describing your conscious experience at a certain time. Um, but yeah, the
Mm-hmm.
problem becomes when you then draw the conclusion that therefore the world, everything is
Yeah.
all one or whatever. And people make that jump very easily. And just like you said there, I think that's the reason why it's a very comforting thing to do, or rather a very uncomfortable thing to rest in that unknowing. I think a lot of that has to do with us not trusting the fundamentally open nature of our being. Once again,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of experience, I think we tend to cling and contract in this dualistic. Yeah, I don't know how you feel now and on an everyday ongoing basis, but usually I would assume that people feel like they are kind of in their body or behind their face. And I'm parroting a lot of what Sam Harris is saying here. I listened to him today, so it's not coming straight from me, all of this. And then you look out at the world, who's something different and separate from you, and you have all these separate objects and everything. And we're
Mm-hmm.
constantly reifying our sense of being separate behind the face, and contracting there. And that comes with the pair of reifying the objects as object and separate from us, right? So that's something we're doing all the time. And so then when you throw tons of acid at that, or a meditation retreat or whatever, and you start to loosen that grip, and all of a sudden maybe those boundaries melt away and you enter into some non-dual type awareness, that is so far from our normal waking day state that I think it's very, very easy and understandable to see why people would jump to, yeah, everything is one, and I was experiencing the whole universe, or
Oh yeah,
whatever you want to
definitely.
call that. But
It's the only way you can get a handle on it.
yeah, exactly. What do I do with this? But part of the benefit of this, these types of experiences, at least the way I see it, is this burning away of conceptual labeling reality and actually just being in the, yeah, it's a different type of knowing, right? It's a
Mm-hmm.
more direct form of acquaintance. I think knowing by acquaintance, Bertrand Russell called it, or something like that.
Yeah.
What was your state like when you decided there that you wanted to come back to the world of the living, as it were? Was that kind of a steady state of something like what we're talking about here, where there was no strong sense of subject or duality, or how would you describe where you were then, and how does that differ from where you are now when we're having this call, for instance?
Oh yeah. Well, it's very different from where I am now, right?
Okay.
I am a very normal person. I mean, like relatively.
Yeah, yeah.
um, but then it was very different. Yeah, it was very different. I was like just massive, massive peace. Like it was really good. It was just total okayness with everything.
Hmm.
Um, very deep. And like I said, not very functional, but that was okay. That's chill. And in hindsight, like I still think that was chill. Like I think some people, I describe my experience to some people and they view it kind of with horror, but I really don't have that. It was extremely beautiful. Really, really lovely. But yeah, definitely waking, very non-dual. I felt as though I was in a dream. I felt like I was what I observed. I mean, I still feel that now.
Hmm.
Uh, complete self-acceptance, complete acceptance of other. I didn't really
Hmm.
believe anything. It felt like a a character on a stage, like wearing a mask. A lot of my art included masks around that time.
Right, very Alan Wattsian, right?
Yeah.
And so the radical self-acceptance and acceptance of other, how much of that have you retained, you think?
I mean, like the thing is, like it's different now. Like in order to integrate it, like a lot had to change. It took me so long to integrate. I'm still integrating to some degree. I
Mm-hmm.
think it took me about a year to regain function, and then maybe another 4 or 5 years to sort of integrate a lot of it. And I think I've managed to be mostly like I feel like I hit some point maybe 3 years ago, and I've sort of been coasting on that. But because there's like I have to be someone in order to work. Like I have to feel not okay with my environment. Like I have to feel anxious or not accepting or something in some degree to be able to be a person
Right.
that's not going to die. And so the question became like, okay, how do I be accepting of being not accepting? And that's been sort of the next journey for me,
Right.
or it was for a long time. Like, how do I become this person who is really separate, who is, I'm like in a body and I'm not you, and I don't understand you,
Yeah,
and I don't want
yeah,
to, like this like dirty little thing. Like, how do I
yeah.
be that and still like feel, to know what I am? How do I both know what I am and not know what I am at the same time? Like, where do I draw that line? How do I find that balance? And I think I feel pretty good. I just did acid 2 days ago, 2 days
Nice.
ago, and I was like,
Nice.
oh
You had
yeah.
a nice
I
afterglow.
was wondering. Yeah, if I was wondering if I took it, like I'd be like, oh, I forgot all this stuff, but it felt great. I think I'm doing things right. Um,
Mm.
I feel very balanced at the moment, and it's just, it is. I'm just gonna stutter as I try and figure out my words here.
Nice.
Um, but it feels more like just figuring out how to become like completely indistinguishable from everyone else, but with greater skill. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. You said there that you kind of wanted to, or you needed a way to find to get anxious again, or like not be pleased with the situation to actually motivate yourself to not just lay and drool on the floor. Um,
Yeah.
do you think it's necessary to have some level of discontentment to um, to actually act in the world? Do you think you need that pull of discomfort somehow, like in terms of some level of suffering, uh, to motivate that?
Yeah, for me, yeah, definitely. But I feel like a big part of the shift for me, like that click when I decided, like, oh, I'm going to stop doing acid, was that
Mm-hmm.
now that discontent was a choice. Like, I was
Mm,
choosing to take on the anxiety and whatever in order to live.
right.
And I'm like, oh, this is part of what it means. And then I became very grateful for all of it. So yeah,
Mm.
for at least for me, it's an inevitable part of life. But at least for me, I wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah, it's funny. My brother called me like a few days ago and basically said every word you said now that he had on a on a big experience like this, but he had it all
Oh,
over just one trip. He recapitulated everything you said there, basically.
oh,
But
that sounds so nice.
yeah, he was so excited about it, and me being an asshole, right? I had to start digging into the specifics there because I think that's fun. But so how because I guess my alternative potential view would be that, I mean, much of what you're saying, it just sounds very Buddhist. I mean, there are many different types of Buddhism and framings, but one of them is basically you see the empty nature of experience. There's no essence to anything. Everything is, yeah, like you said, dreamlike, and you can't grasp it. It's like grasping air, and it's very freeing to
Mm.
actually see that. But then you can also there's a trouble there where people, they call it clinging to emptiness, where people just bliss out in that state because it's so freeing and it feels so good, and they kind of do it. It sounds similar to what you're describing here, um, during your journey with acid there over time, but then the full insight is when you notice that, yeah, but form, appearances, everything that arises in emptiness, such as, yeah, anxiety and being Aella the person and everything pedestrian sounding is inseparable from this emptiness.
Yeah.
And you're not fully integrating the insight. You're still stuck if you're stopping before. And so then you come back into the world, but you can still retain the insight that everything is empty, but there's immense freedom to actually fully engage and be inspired to move and dance and create and interact with people. It's not coming from any type of lack or trying to get somewhere to finally become good enough or whatever. It's coming from the fundamental freedom to fully express yourself in the world.
It's really beautiful. It also reminds me a little of I remember that, like, at one point as I switched from viewing people, like other people, as like kind of less enlightened than me to becoming more enlightened than me. Like,
right.
There was some way, like we were describing this, almost this cycle of like kind of going into bliss and then coming out with the insight. And
right.
And when I was in the bliss, I realized that everybody else was already out. And, you know, inside or not, but like it kind of doesn't matter. Like everybody else was successfully being people. They were successfully rejecting, they were successfully accepting the form. And I was like, shit, that, wow. I spent all this time trying to get here. And it turns out the answer
I took this huge detour.
Yeah. It was already there.
Right. But so wait, so if I understood you correctly, you're saying that I am more enlightened than you, Aella?
Yeah, it's in a way, yeah. I mean, it's like a circle, right?
Woohoo!
And you're always like chasing the person in front of you.
Yeah. No, that's really cool.
Like enlightened just feels like kind of a prank word, you know?
Yes.
It's like it means something, and then you're like, aha, and then you're like, but just kidding. It turns out it was the other thing. And it's like, no matter where you place that word, enlightenment, like you're always like, but actually.
I hate the word for that very reason, that it implies that something can be finished. And it seems like, the only finished state is when you're dead. Otherwise, it's always going to move, and you're always going to learn and grow, hopefully. But that's interesting.
One way I enjoy handling the word is like everybody is already enlightened, and then you just have to. Some people kind of notice that they are.
Yep.
But it's not that anybody actually has a property that anyone else lacks. It's just sort of an orientation to that property.
Kind of the sun is already shining. You just need to see it behind the clouds rather than.
Yeah, I mean that does like indicate like a difference in the state, and like it's hard because like there kind of is a difference in the state. Like there obviously is something different about me than when I first started this journey, and that is true. But like also there's a way in which I'm like totally not changed at all, and that's also true.
Yeah,
and I don't know, it's cool. Other people are also not changed at all, and they got it.
Yeah,
they're enlightened.
Yeah, it's nice. I love all these paradoxes, seeming paradoxes. But so I mean, but that's interesting that you say that, because I feel like you were into enlightenment for a while there in terms of trying to figure out what it was, and if I'm not mistaken, you had interviews with people who claimed to be enlightened, right?
Yes.
I'm very curious what motivated that in the first place, and also what conclusions you came to meeting all these enlightened people, quote unquote.
Well, yeah, I got interested in it because I don't know, I did a lot of my journey in total isolation. Like I didn't read any books. I didn't know any like schools of thought. I didn't have a teacher. And so my stuff was like pretty whack. And after a few years, I was like, okay, I wonder like what the fuck happened to me. Like I don't know how I relate to other people who are doing meditative journeys at all. So I started talking to some people. I talked to some like people who are like professionals at it, like written books or like live their life dedicated to being a monk or something. And then they would disagree with each other. They would say things like, oh, you know, the journey is clearly here, or you are clearly here, or this other person is clearly wrong. And that was sort of shocking to me, because I think I sort of assumed that there was like one clear thing that everybody kind of had been figuring out. And to hear very confident, very experienced people who've been doing, you know, meditating hardcore for 30 years being like, no, the other person is full of shit. I'd be like, what the fuck is going on here?
Right.
And there was some sort of like confusion about like what the authority was or where the authority was about this. And so I was like, all right, I'll just interview a whole bunch of people about who claimed to be enlightened and just see. I didn't go in trying to say that there was an enlightenment. I just want to say, okay, if you use that word, what is the thing that you're trying to describe with that word? To kind of just build out a map of what people were talking about. Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like that was perfect base for the best game show ever devised, right? You just take all these enlightened people who are so sure they're enlightened and you pit them against each other in a Jeopardy kind of fashion or something. That's great.
Yeah.
I'd like to compete. Yeah, that sounds fun. But so what impression did you get then meeting all these people? Did you believe any of them in the end? Was there anyone where you were like, okay, yeah, I believe that this motherfucker is enlightened?
Well, I mean, that requires like having a conception of enlightenment. I believe that they weren't lying to themselves, at least most of them. I got the sense from most that they were like being pretty honest. So the question is just like, they were just using the word enlightenment to refer to this experience they were having, which like, sure, like I don't really care what word you use. Like the actual truth is like the thing that you're trying to convey underneath it. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't really, there were a couple people who I felt more impressed by, in the sense that like they said things that felt like it. Did you just, okay.
Yes.
Yeah, they said things that were like resonated, something that I felt like was deeper wisdom in me. But you know, like I have like my own specific view, and other people have their own specific view. So it's like, who knows what's going on? I don't fucking know. But I very roughly came up with 4 categories, and this is just like my interpretation of it. And the 4 categories are not perfect by any means, but it roughly seemed like there were people who reported enlightenment feelings that didn't have to do with spirituality. So there was like the people who were like, oh, I'm very small in the universe. I'm just like made out of evolution. You know, I am a cluster of cells.
Right.
They described it. Usually wasn't like meditation based or anything. Usually it was just like having this profound revelation that like changed the way that their identity felt. And then there were the skill people who are like very interested in like technical skill. And usually these are meditators. And so like, yes, I've meditated for 5 years and now I can do this specific thing with my mind. And usually they were like much more precise with their language, or like had terms that I didn't understand. And then there were the standard enlightenment people who like both, it was a mix of meditation and psychedelics, who had like much more paradoxical stuff. I would consider this like the Alan Watts kind of direction. Right. Yeah, and this was the one that I like personally. Yeah. It was like, usually had a way harder time with words to describe what the fuck was going on. And it was like a lot more like loosey-goosey and elusive. Yeah. And 5th was traditional. So people who like actually have beliefs about karma and reincarnation and stuff. And are like, okay, like achieving enlightenment is like extremely hard and rigorous, and you have to go through these stages. Like very like old style Buddhist type. And those would say, as roughly speaking, based on my personal feelings, which may not, like if other people did those interviews, maybe they came up with different categories, but those are the 4.
That's very interesting. I mean, it's so hard to disentangle, because first you have, like we said before, you have the validity of the experience itself. And there, many people might actually have high introspective prowess. But then when they're supposed to describe it, they all have different conceptual frameworks and histories and different cultures they're indoctrinated in. And it doesn't, just because you have the experience doesn't save you from making the conceptual errors and getting into a lot of trouble there. But I definitely think that there's an immense freedom in not finding your one true authority that's outside of yourself to cling to, whatever they say. Like, I wanted to ask you about, the name of your blog, Knowing Less, and how you view knowing in general these days. Because, like I mentioned, this podcast began in epistemology, and especially a branch called fallibilism, Are you aware of what
Hmm.
that is?
I am not.
Okay, so basically, it just means that there are no people are fallible, and knowledge creation is a process of guessing and then testing guesses against criticisms and the world. And yeah, there's no such thing as any authority in the end. You can't receive pristine knowledge from someone because the process of, yeah, it's all conjecture, it's all guesswork for everyone. And so essentially nobody has any clue what the fuck they're doing, right? And we're all equal in our infinite fallibility. And I think that's, it doesn't mean we can't make progress. It's not some kind of bottomless relativism where nothing matters. It's the opposite. We can make progress, but yeah, there's don't take anyone's word for it. Essentially, I guess.
Hmm.
And
That
so,
sounds like such an important insight.
yes, yeah, especially when you have it, when you fully feel it in your bones and not just say the words, right?
Right.
And you strike me as a person who embodies that kind of a view, and I myself have been the opposite. Most of my life, I've been very, very untrusting in my own ability to, yeah, make decisions or figure out for myself what's right. So I've always delegated to authority, and I think that's why finding this type of work was so seminal for me and resonated so strongly, and also why things like I would never admit to having used any of these illegal compounds because I'm still gainfully employed at the moment, and Sweden frowns upon these things. But in theory, I really like LSD and MDMA and things that, in my mind, similar to you, takes away these beliefs and leaves us in this unknowing rather than have us cling to whatever someone else has said. But it's an acquired taste. It is scary in the beginning to let go of what you feel is, yeah, an indispensable pillar of being you.
Yeah, and some people like having external authority. Like,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
is fine and good. Like, if that's the thing that like brings you joy, then fucking go for it. But like
yeah.
if you're trying to find your own, it can be super. I really resonate. Like, I think maybe I might appear like somebody who has a lot of internal authority, but when you described like always kind of like doubting yourself and looking towards the outside, I really resonate with that quite a lot. I feel like
Right.
I'm, maybe it's like a weird self conception, but I feel like I'm more inclined to have social beliefs than other people. But it's also like in the spiritual journey, like that's a big thing to grapple with. I know so many people on spiritual journeys who like have a teacher, and I don't fully understand why. And I get that like that it's a tool that you can use for like really good effect, and some people report having like great experiences with teachers. But there's
Yes.
some part of myself that's like, as soon as like a teacher enters the frame, there's some sort of like you're giving yourself up in some way. Like you're
Right.
looking outside yourself. I don't know. Maybe that's the frame shift people need in order to progress.
Right.
I don't know.
Right. I think I see what you mean. That kind of inherent to the whole spiritual search. It's kind of antithetical to that in some weird way. But then again, if you want to do a specific type of meditation, just like if you go to a golf teacher to learn how to swing better, like that could be useful, I suppose, to just learn what to look for. But then you have to make sense of it yourself. But I agree with you. The whole guru disciple kind of relationship is inherently flawed in that sense. I heard someone say that a good heuristic is if the teacher, quote unquote, is deferring back to you and your own wisdom as part of his or her teaching, rather than saying, no, you should listen to me.
Yeah, the teacher's like a mirror. If your job is just
Yes.
to like reflect back, that
Yes.
seems chill. Because then you're using yourself to teach, right? It's just like I'm going to help you teach yourself, as opposed to me doing
Exactly.
anything.
Yeah. Right. I guess that's what good therapy is too, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. I mean, do you you said you did acid 2 days ago. That's great. How often do you do it these days?
I do like a bigger dose maybe once a year. And then I occasionally do smaller doses throughout the year, like closer to micro, like 20 micrograms or something.
Right, right. And are you big into well, that's a leading question. Let me rephrase it. Um how does, because I know you've spoken about, yeah, the dancing part and how that can be a very beautiful thing to you, right? And you wanted to get more rationalist people into moving their bodies a little more. What
Yeah.
because for me then, every all these introspective things, I'm very big into somatic body type work, where I feel like psychedelics often help to induce yeah, unconscious movement, or like the body knows exactly what it wants to do, and I'm not doing any of it. Like have you had a lot of those type experiences? Are you a somatic type person, or is it more the insights, are they more intellectual for you?
I'm not sure. Because I'm not
Right.
sure exactly what you mean by somatic. I definitely have had the experience of like, oh, my body wants to assume this position. I'm going to let it do that.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I do like a fuck ton of child's pose,
Right,
but I'm not
right.
sure.
Nice.
Do you mean something more than that?
I mean, I guess for me in a normal day nowadays, I can sit on the bus and I feel a tinge of anxiety, and the best theory I have of anxiety is that whenever you feel anxious, there's some type of emotion that you're not wanting to feel or that you're blocking, and so yeah, my body tends to do weird movements or twitches, or I make weird sounds, or it's just like some type of bodily nervous system type processing that goes on there whenever I have
Hmm.
emotions involved. And I don't know if I'm completely atypical at this point and just a lunatic, but I'm curious if that's so. When I do any of these things, I just get strong physical reactions to that, in the sense of shaking or moving around, rolling around in the bed, and just like
Yeah, I think likely I do some degree of this, but it sounds like a lot less than you do. Like if I had to
okay,
guess, I'd
yeah,
say maybe I do 20% of what you're describing, or like
right,
to the degree and frequency.
right, right,
Yeah, I'm just not a huge, but I had this for a while. I was around a bunch of people who were meditating a lot, and they're having a bunch of like physical responses to things, and I
yeah.
just like never really had that. I really like moving and feeling things in my body, but I never had
Mm.
like the very strong like physical responses that some people have.
How tense would you say you are, like in terms of body tension in general?
Pretty chill. I'm often described as like a slinky or something, like just like a ball of goo.
Right, 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 right.
I do have some tension in my upper shoulders, but
Okay.
besides that, I'm like a a
Yeah.
poof ball. I don't know.
Slinky. I love that. Yeah. My wife usually says, what is it she says? Yeah, just melt. She likes melting in the couch or something on weekends. I love
Yeah,
that. I
melting
love that
sounds
idea.
right.
Yeah, that sounds right. Right. Um, I mean, you've already touched on it a little bit, but the thing you described with the tree and burning down parts of it, is that filling in the blanks there immediately for comfort? Is that what you call belief constructing, or is it anything? Yeah, can you expand on that term a little
Yeah,
bit, because I heard you spoke about that before.
yeah. That was I actually thought about that earlier, but then it was the moment passed to bring it up. But yeah,
Mm.
I mean, I was trying to figure out why some people seem to have constructive acid trips and others don't. Like I trips out a lot of people for a while, and some people would take it and be like, "Wow, I'm introspect," like having the kind of experience that I would have, like introspecting a lot, and then other people would take it and then develop beliefs about what's going on, like, "Oh, there's a pig
Mm.
in the corner," or like, "Oh, the police are here,"
Right.
or like, "Oh, you're actually a witch trying to steal my soul." Right? And then I was like, wait, what's happening? What is the difference between these two people? Like some brains, it just like hits some brains differently. I don't mean that it's any like personal flaw of the person. I just think it's like probably a way that your brain is constructed or something.
Right.
But like this would be an example of belief construction, like maybe an acute one because it's happening like directly on LSD,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like something like things are not what you expect. You're confused, and so your brain like very aggressively tries to make up an explanation to get the best sense out of what's going on,
Mm.
like instead of resting without an explanation. And that would be like a belief construction, right? Like you're constructing the beliefs in order to deal. Uh, my guess is that belief construction is associated with less productive acid trips. I did do
Mm.
a big survey a long time ago to try to figure out if there was anything associated with belief construction, do higher IQ people belief construct more, or like what if you're religious, or what if you're
Right.
more anxious? And I found no correlations. I asked a whole bunch of questions about anything I could think of, and not a single one of them significantly impacted whether or not people reported belief constructing, which was really surprising to me. I don't really understand.
Wow. Yeah. Because that, on the face of it, I would have made the same assumption there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but okay, so you would say, in general, if you're the kind of person who tends towards belief constructing, then maybe take it a little easier when it comes to jumping in
Right.
headfirst with acid at a party.
Right. Yeah. If your brain's like the kind of brain that like seems to need to have an explanation. So like generally my advice for people is take like a very small amount of acid, check
Mm-hmm.
how it goes, and then like slowly increase the dose over time. And then if you start to notice yourself belief constructing, like if you come down from acid afterwards and you're like, wow, I was really convinced of this thing that's not true, then my recommendation would probably not to be to increase the dose of acid after that.
Right. That's interesting. Now I'm curious about myself. Do you think this is something that is like somehow an inherent leaning you have, or is it something that's learned and can be unlearned?
I have no idea. I really no idea. I mean, I would need like way more data to know this, like an
If you had
experience.
to guess.
My guess is that it's inherent. My guess is that it's like being able to taste cilantro or not.
Right. Right. But I'm not sure if I believe that, because I would say I was super prone to belief constructing most of my life. And now I feel like I'm
Oh yeah.
eager to deconstruct.
Oh,
So I'm not
that's a
sure.
point of evidence against my guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
What? How did you change? Like, what made that change happen?
Uh, yeah. So a combination of a lot of things, but I think basically the last 2 years I've spent doing what I call emotional processing of different sorts, just trying to find and evoke uh, what I see as unconsciously repressed material that was too overwhelming to deal with at the time when it
Mm-hmm.
happened, and the ensuing beliefs that you formed about yourself and the world because of that. And
Do you have an
so,
example of the kind of belief you formed?
um, yeah, I'm worthless. Um, my
Hmm.
my needs are not important. Um, it's not
And
okay
you
to.
formed these beliefs while on psychedelics?
No, no, okay, no, no. I meant that they probably happened when I was very, very young,
Oh,
when I was a
right,
kid.
right.
But then
Yeah.
that followed me into adulthood, and it wasn't until maybe 3 years ago, or even now, I would say I'm very comfortable with and excited. If you were to say, "Oh, Christopher, I don't agree with that at all," that's like way more fun for me to hear than, "Oh yeah, I agree. You're so right about that." Like it's fun
Hmm.
to wiggle the pillars a bit rather than yeah,
Yeah, I agree.
hold
You're so
on to
right
them.
about that.
Boo. Yeah. No, I mean that's nice too. Of course. Of course. But but I don't know. We tend to I think it's fairly unusual for someone to not want to identify with um beliefs of certain kinds. I mean, I think it has to do with what we spoke about before, the reification of you as a subject behind your face, um,
Hmm.
being something else than the objects. Like I think that's just an extension of that we like to cling to and reify ourselves and our identities with different beliefs. And I mean, you're very into political stuff, which I'm very uninformed about and not that interested in. But I feel like that's a perfect example of over identifying with certain ideologies and ideas.
Yeah.
Or how do you feel about that?
Yeah. I mean, the coach is like, where in the circle are you? I don't know. Like, over identifying with things is really fun. I mean, and it also sometimes it gets people things that they don't want, like feeling to
Right.
notice things about themselves.
Right. I
But
mean,
also, it's fun.
yeah. You mean identifying with stuff?
Yeah.
Right. But isn't that a little contingent on like something like strong convictions loosely held or something? Like it's more
I
fun if you don't fully believe that a part of you dies if that belief isn't true.
I mean, is it like I feel like I feel like I could imagine it being fun to like be really convinced about it.
And then have someone poke like my mom is very Christian, for instance, and her whole
Mm.
life revolves around God. And I just have the sense that if I somehow managed to poke hole in that balloon and make her disbelieve that God existed, I think that she would be extremely miserable.
Yeah.
But maybe we're talking about
Same mom
different
here.
things.
No, you're right. Like,
Right,
but
right.
like, roller coasters are fun. If I fell out of them, I'd be really miserable.
Yeah.
Like, there's a way where which like the
Oh,
stakes are
okay, okay,
elevated
okay. Nice.
for people who are Christian, right? Like you're playing like the most dangerous game. You know, the stakes are like being burned alive for an eternity or not,
Right.
and that can be really thrilling. Like to get the sense of
Mm.
righteousness, like you know what's going on, and you know that you
Yeah,
have
yeah,
like the
yeah,
good
yeah.
stakes, and you're here to fight the war of good and evil, and tell other people they're wrong. Like that seems like a really just intense and kind of fun experience.
Yeah, I've never thought of it that way, but that's really interesting. Yeah. I mean, I like knowing about your background. I like that that's the view. I find that interesting because I would I would consider it reasonable too to be very done with religion, as it were, and just demonize the whole project, right?
Yeah.
All right, so I think let's end on some Twitter questions here. One of them is, what is the difference between reluctantly working in the sex industry and reluctantly working in any other industry? Somebody asks.
Oh, this is people. Yeah. For a second, I thought you were reading Twitter polls, and I was like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, this is a good question. I mean, a lot of people say there's a difference
Mm-hmm.
because like there's more social stigma about the sex industry. But like if you minus the social stigma, there's not really that much difference.
Right. I mean, I'm not sure what the questioner meant there, but if there's some kind of moral element to it or a more of an element of coercion or something.
Yeah, I mean, then the question is like, are there higher rates of coercion in the sex industry than there are in like agriculture?
Right.
And the answer is like unclear. Like maybe it depends on where in the world you are.
Yeah.
But like even so, like slavery is bad. You shouldn't do it. And
Yeah.
I'm like assuming when we were asking the question, like working in an industry, I'm assuming that we're not talking about people who are enslaved.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assumption, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the same person asked, considering that paying for sex is almost non-existent among women, do men gain something from sex that women don't? More generally, how is the role and significance of sex different for men and women?
Men gain a lot of social status from having sex with women. Like, given a world where you have consent and like there's much more demand on the man side for sex than there is for women, this means that like if a man has sex with a woman, it's like much more of an indication of his prowess and success than it is if a woman does it. So yeah, I mean, there's a fuck ton of that. We were evolved from a species where like pregnancy happens as a result of sex for most of our past, and that burden is borne by the woman. So of course, this like radically changes what sex means for each gender.
What are the best and worst drugs you've ever been on?
Best is acid, definitely. I don't know if that's the worst. Like maybe I like maybe the weed has like the is the worst. It's not like I dislike it, but like if I had to rank them, like weed has like the highest rate of unpleasant experiences.
I hate weed. I really dislike it. So I'm glad to hear you say that. Okay, right. But it's okay. So no black tar heroin or anything like that you.
I haven't tried it
Okay.
yet.
Okay. Yet. That's cool. Maybe next time if I get you to come back on the podcast, we can do a live
Yeah,
a live
we could
session.
do black card heroin live.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm actually going to be selfish and have the last question here. So
Please.
yeah, I'm just curious how you go about. We didn't get into your history there, but uh, how do you approach knowing as a project in general these days?
Approach knowing as a project?
Yeah, what does it mean to to strive to know, or how do you more in practical terms approach your own beliefs and how you think about different topics?
I love knowing things. Knowing things feels so fun. It feels
Right.
like I've like it's placed me, like pinned me down in the world or something. Like instead of floating above the water, I've like found a boat and I'm sitting in it. And there's some way that a part of me can relax when I like quote unquote know a thing. And I
Right.
love collecting it. I love collecting knowledge. I love like knowledge feels like data points that you can use to predict more things. And so when I predict more things and I get them right, I'm like, fuck yes. And it can be very small. Like, oh, I predict, my friend's going to say this sort of thing or have this kind of reaction.
Yeah.
Or it can be pretty large. Like, oh, I predict that the economy's going to do this. But knowing is like really delightful. I'm really grateful to be able to feel like I know things.
Do you feel like that joy of knowing gets heightened by the comfort of not knowing? Of being comfortable not knowing?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like my blog is called Knowing Less, right? And so there's some like play about it that I like,
Right.
and I enjoy the feeling of like knowing that I'm believing that I'm knowing or something, like as opposed to feeling like you just know things. Like there's sometimes ways where I feel like I know thing where I'm not aware that I feel like I know a thing, where it's just sort of like a default taken, like assumption taken about the world that like is not tagged, or like my attention is not on it as like a thing that is changeable or like a thing that might be incorrect. It's sort of like, oh, well, I just know that is just the way that it is.
Yeah.
But there's a way where like, the knowing less sort of means to become aware that this is like an act that you are doing, that this is like a boat that you've chosen to fall into, that it's not like actually a representation of an underlying reality. Like you are a participant in the knowing just as much like you're creating it.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I love about the fallibilism philosophy, that there's something extremely liberating and exhilarating about knowing that there's no end point to this whole project. Like you can every time you learn about something new, a whole bunch of new problems and interesting questions pop up, and this is inevitable. Like there's no end point there, and that's kind of a nice and beautiful thing.
An infinite game.
Yeah, an infinite game with Aella. That's a good title right there, right? And yeah, I wanted to call it. It's bad to have the title in mind before you start, but I wanted to call it The End of Suffering, because I've heard you say that you don't suffer anymore.
Aw, that's sweet.
Thanks. But so I assume that has to do with not having aversion to pain.
Right. Yeah. It seems like you viscerally understand that.
Yeah. Right. All right. Super fun talking to you, Aella. I'm really grateful that I got to pick your brain a little bit.
Yeah, thank you. This is I enjoy. Usually my interviews are about OnlyFans, so I like it when I get one that's about like the weird brain stuff.
Nice. That's awesome to hear. And yeah, I feel like I spoke a little too much, but I get so excited sometimes. So I hope I hope you feel okay with that.
Yeah.